And then of course the other thing is the yard areas. Archaeologists often dig yard areas, and they would call them sheet middens, but basically areas where middens where artifacts just accumulate over time. Kids lose toys, ceramics get broken, and some of them end up in the yard. So in this area behind, a lot of times you'll find these things behind a building. So the back of this original structure would have been over here, and you can see how much overgrowth there is, which is really one of our big tasks over the next year. I'm not sure how all this is going to work, but we need to get some of this material out of here, and then we could actually do a sample of this area, this yard area. But you can see also just by looking here how much higher we are than this area behind. So it's probably the case, and I think the archaeology bore this out as well, that they built this area up with displaced subsoil. So you have, on this side you don't have as much, but on this side you have maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet of subsoil that they put in here to build up this area, so it's out of the sort of the flooding area, flood zone over there. And in this area it's much higher, so you didn't have to put as much displaced subsoil in to level it out. It's a gear for a clock. You know, so the cool thing about one of the great things about this site is that 3 generations of the Powell family lived here basically from 1818 for sure, when they bought the property, to 1920, when the last remaining Powell granddaughter was living here. So after that, we don't have any evidence that anyone was living here. So all the artifacts that you find, even on the surface like this, belong to the Powell family. So everything you find is evidence of that family. So we'll pick that up later. But there's lots of, there's another thing over here that is just laying on the surface. And this is part of a stove. So this would have gone in this would have been basically where you would boil your water and so on. And there would have been a little handle that would pick it up. And so that was a Powell family stove at one time. And there's other pieces of that as well. Another thing that we look for is you look for any change in the land. And remember I showed you the area where there's a borrow pit? We could see that there was a sunken area by the foundation. At first we thought maybe it was a cistern, because sometimes you'd have a cistern right next to the building where you got your water, where water collected. It was just kind of a slump in the ground, but then when we dug it, we realized that it was a place where they were digging clay out to level the area. But there's another area here, you might not be able to see it with the camera, but there's a slight sort of rise and a dip over there. That's a crown of a road. So that was the road coming into the property, and it came out just on the other side over here. So those are the types of things that you look for. If you look here, there's a slight rise. You can see that. I'll go up to it. So right here, there's a slight rise right in this area. And if you follow this, it goes all the way around to the top of the ridge, and then it comes back around. You can see this in aerial views of the site, LiDAR imagery that shows the relief, where anytime there's a slight rise in elevation, it will show it. This was the easternmost portion of the Powell property, and what we think this was used for is an enclosure for their milk cows. So the cows were here, they would bring them to milk, and then they would bring them back out here to this holding pen. So we're pretty sure this was used by the Powell family. Something like this is not going to have a lot of artifacts, evidence. You might find some fence staples or something like that. But you can obviously see the landform here that they use for the fence. And if you come up this way, I can actually show you something that helps us date this. And one of our questions was whether or not this was also used by the Orishans, which it probably was. They were the family that purchased the property after the Powell family in the 1920s. But we did find some interesting evidence here. So there's two things going on here. So you've got the, this is some later material. This is like sheep fence basically, but this is probably 1930s or 40s maybe. But you can also see the rocks along here. So maybe they took rocks out of this holding pen area and brought them up here to the edge of where there was a fence line. But the other thing that is here, and this is a really interesting artifact that's actually in the tree. This is a type of barbed wire. It's got a flat edge with these triangular points on either side. And this comes in about 1880. So you have this type of barbed wire that dates to the late 19th century. So this was most likely put in by the Powell family. This type of barbed wire wasn't used in the 1920s, the last time the Powells were here. So, and you can see how it's grown right into this tree. So this tree was, I don't know how old this tree is, but this would have been probably maybe a small tree that they used as one of the fence posts back then. And right now it's in the center. So it would have been fairly small. So that's the type of evidence you can actually just find on the surface. Sometimes you'll find a hole out in the woods like this, and a lot of times, like, they could be a tree fall. If you see a depression in the ground, you think about a tree falls. You've probably seen those. It falls down, and then you have this big root ball in the bottom, and then this kind of hole. Well, after years, after the tree is gone, it's and all you have left is this depression after the tree is completely rotted away. Well, if you see something this size, it's too big for a tree fall. You can see there are some stones around the edge, but you can see it's quite deep, and so it's possibly, a structure. You can see there's almost like it looks like there's a foundation right here. We just came across this not too long ago, so I'm not sure if it's related to the Powell family. It could have been the Stotts family who lived right next door. It could be something like a small ice house. If you had an ice house, they'd be really deep. So you put your ice in there, cover a layer of ice, cover it with straw, another layer, more straw, and your ice would survive through the warmer months. So it's possible it's something like that. I'm not sure what else it might be. It's a little bit too small for an ice house, although if it goes back all the way over here, it's possible. If you can imagine something like this that could be 10 to 12 feet deep, maybe deeper. And then over the years, they filled it in, probably for safety reasons, and then eventually leaf matter comes down and fills in the hole. So this is an interesting, archaeological find, and but here again, whether or not it was part of the Powell family or whether or not it was on the Stotts family land, I'm not sure. We're right on the sort of the edge, so it could have been either way. Another thing I can point out here that sometimes you look at the natural features of the landscape to try to figure out some of the cultural activities. In other words, people planted trees, they planted shrubbery, they tried to mold the landscape as they saw fit. And we came across these stumps right here. You have 3 stumps in a row, and you can see they've been cut off in the same manner. And they're fairly They're fairly big, and you can tell that this wasn't done with a chainsaw. This was done a long time ago, probably by the Orshans, maybe in the 1920s. And it's probably some sort of a handsaw that was used to, you can see how there's start and stop points. They cut part of it this way and then came over and cut this part off, and then maybe got a team of horses or something to pull it over. I'm not sure. So you have these three huge stumps. So we think this is probably a boundary marker that existed when the Powells were here. So probably not something that the Powells they planted, but something that just sort of served as a boundary for this property that they purchased in I think in the 1840s. They purchased this little section right here. And then, of course, later used it for, probably for their milk cows. Mm-hmm.